Following on from that, it's really important we all understand what's happening inside Labor and Labor policy on Palestine and why it's all become such a big issue. First, thanks to migration since the 1970s, some Labor seats in Western Sydney have up to 30% Muslim voters, mostly of Middle Eastern Muslim backgrounds. Now, some are Labor members, many take their religious leaders seriously, and most are understandably enough concerned about events in and around their former homelands. Many, wrongly in my view, see Israel's attempt to crush Hamas as genocidal, even though no country could tolerate on its doorstep a terrorist group dedicated to its destruction. As Hamas is to Israel, as Hezbollah is in the north to Israel, as Iran is to Israel, and as groups in the region like Al-Qaeda, Islamic State and more are to Israel, all dedicated to its absolute annihilation. Let's never forget that it was Hamas terrorists who invaded Israel. Invaded Israel on the 7th of October, quite literally revelling in the butchery of women and children simply because they were Jews. Here in Sydney, on the very night of the killings, was this Muslim leader rejoicing in the deaths of Israeli citizens before the government of Israel had even fired back one shot in retaliation.
I'm smiling and I'm happy. I'm elated. It's a day of courage. It's a day of happiness. It's a day of pride.
That's in the Sydney seat of Watson, Tony Burke's seat, frontbencher, Labor frontbencher. It's material to a point I'll make in a moment. But also, secondly, important in all of this is the Marxist mindset, so prevalent on the left, that divides the world into oppressors and oppressed. And for the oppressed, quite literally anything and everything is justified in the fight against their oppressors. So this way of thinking, Israel's not the only liberal democracy in the Middle East, but it's a colonial oppressor. It's not the only place in the Middle East where women and gay people are free to be themselves, but it's a ridiculous bastion of white privilege. Hence, the slaughter of Jews is justified as resistance to oppression, while Israel's attempts to fight back are simply genocide. Now, this is an absurd caricature of reality, but don't underestimate how pervasive it is, thanks to decades of brainwashing, reinforced in this case by ethnic solidarity. Labor's worry is that anti-government sentiment over the failed voice referendum, and let's not forget that nearly all of Labor's outer metro seats voted heavily no, well, they're worried that that will hurt them at the next election. Add in the fact that seats where there is a high Muslim vote are traditionally very socially conservative, and the modern Labor Party push on gender rights, gay rights, trans rights, well, that's all electorally toxic. In seats like Blaxland, held by Jason Clare on a 15% margin, the Muslim vote is 35% of the seat. In nearby Watson, held by Tony Burke, the same 15% margin, well, there's a 27% Muslim vote. And that explains why, despite the public outcry, Tony Burke never called out the Islamic leader and his celebration of the October 7 atrocities that I just showed you a moment ago. That occurred in Burke's own electorate. The fear from Labor hardheads is that resentment over Gaza could fuel successful independent campaigns, exploiting a sense that Labor takes this vote for granted. Now, it's not a threat from a Liberal candidate in these seats, but a threat of a high-profile independent. Someone like Di Lee, who scored a 16% swing to her, causing Labor's Christina Keneally to lose the seat of Fowler at the last federal election. Hence Labor's long crab walk away from supporting Israel. Compare Penny Wong's call this week for the formal recognition of Palestine with Bob Hawke's very sombre statement after he travelled to Israel and met with the then Prime Minister Golda Meir. He said, if the bell tolled for Israel, it won't just toll for Israel, it will toll for all mankind. a lion of Labor's right faction, Hawke described visiting Israel as a life-changing event. He described Israel as an inspiration, a small, lone democracy in the Middle East. As Simon Benson says today in The Australian, it was Bob Carr, ironically a former president of Labor Friends of Israel, who began the quiet dismantling of Labor's long-held position, having been captured by the pro-Palestinian movement and the shifting electoral politics of Western Sydney. Benson goes on and says the ideological disintegration of the once powerful and sensible New South Wales right facilitated the shift from supporter of Israel to now vicious enemy. Make no mistake, massive global forces are building to try and stymie Israel's campaign and allow Hamas to survive, not only to fight again, but to claim a massive propaganda victory. Now, this cannot be allowed to succeed, lest the Jewish people face the real prospect of a second Holocaust. And the rest of us in the West, we face a cultural annihilation of our own.